The one thing in my mind that really separates Belgian ale from other regional styles is their unique fermentation character. Esters and phenols imparted by a certain type of yeast, the degree of which varies between strains. For those who are into more balanced Belgian character, something that won't clash with hops or overwhelm the senses, Imperial Yeast just released B53, a new seasonal strain that promises to produce beers with a clean, bright ester profile. And while it works great on its own, using it in conjunction with W15 Suburban Brett in secondary leads to a beer that's crisp, dry, and deliciously complex. Be sure to grab some B53 Precious right away because it is a seasonal release and will not be around for long.
It wasn't that long ago that craft brewers proudly flaunted the fact that the beer they peddled was living, chock full of all the flavorful compounds and yeast absent in the popular pale lagers offered by Big Beer. While some have held on to this idea, many craft brewers of today make an effort to ensure their beer is beautifully bright. This is the Brewlosophy Podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott, and with me today is contributor Jake Houlihan to chat about the impact mechanical filtration has on beer.
Yeah, as someone who really loves clear beer, mechanical filtration has kind of always been something that I've been very interested in. I understand the romantic aspect of craft beer being hazy and unfiltered and, free of any commercial process. But for me, I love that bright beer.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. And we live in a day and age where bright beer, there are styles that are specifically made to not be bright. People kind of pine for that haze. But what we're talking about is the impact that filtration can have on beers that are supposed to be clear. Back when I got into drinking more than just mass market lagers, I was admittedly enticed by this whole unfiltered argument. It made sense to me that removing all of that stuff would also remove some flavor. I guess you could say that I have a bit of a different perspective these days, and that's based on both experience and data, which we're going to get into a bit in this show. Listen, if you're one of those people who listen to this podcast right when episodes are released, you have very little time to save $125 on registration for the BYO Boot Camp in Asheville, North Carolina that Drew Beecham, Denny Kahn, and I will be presenting at. If you purchase your tickets by January 22nd, which for many of you is today, you will get $100 off. Plus, you can save an additional $25 by using coupon code BYO Bootcamp Brewlosophy at checkout. Hesitate no longer. We would absolutely love to see you there. Hang out in Asheville. I'm stoked to check that town out. Just a couple days ago, Pico Brew's Annie Johnson spent over an hour answering questions from patrons of Brewlosophy, and as expected, it was absolutely fantastic. Coming up next is the dude who some credit as starting the whole haze craze with his Heady Topper IPA, the alchemist John Kimmich. If you've ever seen any of the talks that John's given, you know how good this Q&A session is going to be. To get in on the action and to learn about receiving other cool rewards like Yakima Valley hops discounts and never before published recipes in exchange for helping us to bring you this show, head over to patreon.com/brewlosophy. Dead serious, we would not be able to do this if it weren't for Patreon and all of our awesome patrons out there. Thank you guys so much. And thanks to everybody who's been using the links at brewlosophy.com/support when doing your online shopping as well. Feedback this week is brought to you by Brewers Hardware, who provide brewers with some of the most beautiful stainless gear out there, such as their new turnkey BH15 pilot system, which has a hard plumb manifold to eliminate all hosing changes during the brew process. On top of the complete brewing systems they sell, Brewers Hardware has a bunch of unique, purpose-built products useful to both professionals and homebrewers. Go check out everything they have to offer at brewershardware.com. And don't forget to mention the Brewlosophy Podcast at checkout to receive a free gift. That's brewershardware.com. All right. So the other night, I'm lying in bed, waiting for my wife to come to bed, watch a show with me. The kiddos were asleep. I just played a few rounds of team deathmatch with my brother. I was feeling pretty good. Things were really chill. So I pick up my phone while I'm waiting and hop on the old Facebook to kill some time and notice someone had tagged me in a comment to another person's post asking about favorite podcasts. I was tagged because this person recommended the Brewlosophy Podcast. Cool, right? Well, I started scrolling through the other comments and stumbled on one I felt was valid enough to address on the show. In response to the original poster's question-seeking podcast recommendations, a guy named Brant Calder, I believe, recommended the Brewing Network podcasts, Basic Brewing Radio, Experimental Homebrew, and Beersmith. All great podcasts, friends of Brewlosophy. We still listen to most of those shows as well. But then he said, I can't listen to Brewlosophy anymore. I find it so grating, especially when he says rad. Listen, Brant, I'm a kid of the 80s. I don't know what to tell you. I grew up saying rad all the time, the same way people nowadays, I guess, say cool or sweet or nice. It just became a normal part of my vocabulary. I don't mean to do it to hurt anybody's feelings. It's also the name of one of my favorite movies ever made. So while I think it truly sucks that you don't listen anymore because I occasionally use a word that grates on you, it'd be disingenuous for me to apologize because honestly, it's just a word. But that said, I think it'd be rad if you gave us another chance. So
you know what? I listened to a podcast that had Tony Hawk as a guest about a couple weeks ago. And his thought was that rad is making a comeback, and he thinks it will be, part of the normal vernacular pretty soon here.
I don't understand. I honestly don't remember it ever making a go away. I just have always said it. And it's funny that people notice that kind of stuff when I don't even notice it myself.
I mean, I noticed it a little bit. I was born a little bit later than you, but I don't know. To me, it's just part of who you are.
Thank you. Does it grate on you? Does it bother you that I say rad?
Nah.
God, thank you. Thank you for accepting me and my language. One word that I used to say all the time as a kid that I don't ever hear anymore is fresh. Man, that's fresh. Brant, I won't start saying fresh, but I do think it'd be rad if you gave us another chance, dude. So if you have show feedback, you can send it to feedback@brulosophy.com. Leave us a voice message by calling 951-444-0320, or you can risk just saying something on social media. We might pluck it up and read it on the show. All right, for those of you who have better memories than me, you might recall us reviewing a spiced Belgian dark strong ale that listener Elvar Bjarkesen made. Well, he lives in Worcester, Massachusetts, which is where Wormtown Brewery is, and Elvar also, I believe it was Elvar, sent me a bottle of Wormtown's Bee Hoppy IPA.
1 minute beer review with Jersey and Tim.
It's dark. It is dark. That means it's either a stout, I don't know, what else are the options for the dark ones? Coffee, lager, maybe a little bit of a a porter.
It does smell. I don't like it that much.
Man, I'm going to jump out there. This might actually be a barley wine,
Yeah,
right?
it does.
It's got that kick side kick, like a sidecar punch to the face.
This is like
I don't want to make a fool of myself, but this kind of tastes like a barley wine.
it's about a 10.5%.
Yeah, I was going to go 8. We're going to go 8. Figure that one out, Timmy.
I don't like it.
Are we in agreement?
I'm going 3.
No, dude, it's actually, if it is a barley wine,
It's not bad.
if it is a barley wine, it's actually,
I've drank a lot worse.
I'm going to give it 6.9 jerseys
I already said 3.
for a total of 4.23.
That was a quick calculation.
So this is an IPA, Jersey.
Oh, bullshit.
No way.
There's no way.
Liar face.
So I literally, while you guys were reviewing it,
Here we go.
I'm dead serious. I went and I looked it up. It apparently has great reviews online. There's no way at this color. This has got to be approaching 18 to 20 SRM.
No.
It looks like a brown
SRM. Short range missile. I know what that is.
It looks like a brown ale. It tastes like pine sol mixed with a little bit of maple syrup, in my opinion.
He's
I'll
good.
be honest, this
He's
is not
good.
a homebrewed beer.
Oh, in that case, it sucks.
This is Bee Hoppy by Wormtown Brewery, 6.5% alcohol. I have a feeling that this is from Worcester, Massachusetts. Worcester. I have a feeling that their packaging process isn't as good as a lot of home.
I'm sorry, but this is not an IPA,
There's
Marshall.
no way this color of beer. It's crystal clear, but it is brown. There's no way this color of beer after just 4 weeks in my fridge should be this dark for an IPA.
I don't give a shit. It's not an IPA.
I think it's oxidized. I get a really oxidized kind of sherry.
I don't know what
like
that means,
sherry.
I don't know,
Do you
it
guys know what
sucks.
sherry is besides that?
sherry, hello. I can't.
So it tastes like that.
tastes like sherry.
It tastes a little bit oxidized to me. It really does not taste like an IPA.
Don't give a shit what you
This
say,
is not
man.
a beer that I would drink.
No.
In the state that it's in.
It's not an
Take it
IPA.
away.
Take it away. I will drink the rest, and you guys are dumb.
All right, so this beer was really not very good. I'm not sure if that's what it was supposed to taste and look like. I'm kind of not even sure if it was maybe a different beer that and Elvar just used that bottle to package it in or something. But it was bitter. It was IPA like, just kind of dark and not very good. Would you think is the issue with an IPA that turns darker than you'd expect it to be and just has that really sharp bitterness, kind of a cloying sweetness?
I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is probably obviously oxidation. But I mean, you never know.
That was where I went with it as well. I thought maybe the beer was oxidized. We talked a little bit about that, but it was kind of funny. When you couch a beer review, or a beer that you're reviewing at least, in a style, so if this is supposed to be an IPA, it completely changes the way you perceive, in my opinion at least, the way you perceive that beer. And if I had told the guys that maybe it was a brown ale or something, the review would have been different, right? Because now you're evaluating relative to a style that it's supposed to be. I just thought it was interesting. If you want your beer or any other fermented beverage reviewed by Jersey and Tim, you can email me, Marshall@brewlosophy.com, and we'll get you all set up. All right, stick around. We're going to be back in a minute.
After a long brew day, the last thing I want to do is waste more time chilling wort. I've tried so many different options, and ultimately I settled on the super efficient immersion chillers made by Jaded Brewing. With the King Cobra and Hydra, I'm able to chill my entire batch of wort from boiling to just a few degrees above groundwater temperature in as little as 6 minutes. If an immersion chiller is right for your brewery, then do yourself a favor and check out all of the rad options Jaded Brewing has to offer at jadedbrewing.com, and be sure to let them know Brewlosophy sent you.
Hi, I'm Stephen Leach, creator of Brow Supply Brewing Systems, here to tell you about our latest Unibrow brewing system. Modeled after the brew-in-a-bag method, the Unibrow uses the same kettle for both mashing and boiling, replacing the fabric bag with a stainless basket that can hold up to 20 pounds of grain. A heating element is run by an electric controller that allows for the maintenance of specific mash temperatures and makes mashing easier than ever. Each Unibrow is shipped with a counterflow chiller and the parts required to brew a batch of beer. We're really proud of the Unibrow, and we know you'll love it as much as we do. Go check it out at browsupply.com and sign up for our email list to receive special deals in your inbox.
Family-owned Atlantic Brew Supply is the largest homebrew shop in the Southeast. No gimmicks, no multinational corporate overlords, and no BS. They offer exclusive malts, yeast, and more from local artisans, as well as award-winning recipe kits. They also sell professional brewing gear and cask equipment from sister companies ABS Commercial and Cask Supply. Most ingredients are available by the ounce, plus Atlantic Brew Supply has an on-site calculator to help you craft your best brew. Orders are processed same day, and 2-day shipping is guaranteed for East Coast customers. Get 15% off your first order using promo code BREWPOD. That's BRUPOD at AtlanticBrewSupply.com. As every brewer knows, the best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world, carrying everything from classics like Cascade to modern favorites like Galaxy and Mosaic, as well as other ingredients and gear. Yakima Valley Hops has it all. And don't forget to check out their new podcast, The Late Edition, where the YVH crew goes into depth on our favorite plant with industry experts. Head over to YakimaValleyHops.com now to see all they have to offer, and subscribe to The Late Edition wherever it is you listen to podcasts.
I'm just going to come out and say it. I think filtration got a bad rap, and I blame early craft brewers for that. Sure, it may not be necessary to achieve delicious beer, but using it as a wedge between craft and corporate beer just seems so trivial to me. Anyway, before we really get into the presumed impact of filtration, I think it'd be good to clarify what exactly filtration is. Filtration, a lot of people automatically assume that when they hear the word filtration, that it refers to the use of some sort of a machine to clarify beer. Now, technically, though, any action or process used to remove sediment from beer is considered filtration, which means the use of products like gelatin or biofine clear or clarity firm is a form of filtration. We refer to that as chemical filtration. I just wanted to clarify that for anyone out there, because a lot of craft brewers are using things like biofine and clarity firm and gelatin and whatnot. So they are technically filtering their beer. Now, they may not be using a mechanical filter, which is what the purpose of this episode is.
Right. So we'll jump into, I guess, the history of filtration just a little bit to get started here. So filters have been used by like human civilization since pretty much the beginning of recorded history. Mainly they were used as a way to like increase the safety of a water source, or to, quote unquote, make it more pure. Things that were used were like straw beds in various sediment types. So like think of like sand. You run water through sand, things get caught in there, and then kind of acting like a sieve, the water that drips out the bottom is, quote unquote, more pure.
Right.
In terms of like the mechanical filtration that we use today, a lot of this was developed by the dairy industry or other like food and beverage industries, mainly as a way to increase that shelf stability to get bacteria out of there. But really, it was probably adopted by the beer industry, pretty much concurrently. Dairy does seem to be at the forefront of most processes that result in changes in the beer industry. When we talk about the purpose of filtration, it is kind of like what I said, mainly to increase that shelf stability. So to remove things like certain bacteria that can be filtered out, to remove certain proteins that can cause staling reactions in beer, and also, the last one, it just looks good.
Yeah, there's definitely a vanity component to filtration, I think, that we see nowadays. But when you think about kind of what makes a clear beer so appealing or look appealing and attractive, a part of that is conditioning, right? We've come to know, I think it is like we've been conditioned to view something that's nice and crisp and clear as being less likely to, perhaps because of evolution, less likely to make us feel sick or whatever.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it. Cloudy water is not good water.
Right.
So we've probably evolved to have the opinion that, we can't drink this cloudy water, so we need to drink clear, crisp looking water. And that probably translates over into other things like juices and ultimately beer.
No, it makes sense to me that that's how we would evolve into these creatures that tend to have a preference. I say tend because I get that, people like their Hefeweizens and their New England IPAs. But in general, we tend to view something, a beer at least, or any liquid that we're going to be consuming that's clear, as being maybe safer to consume. Now, in when we're thinking about beer specifically, in terms of filtration, I can't help but kind of tie the whole like isinglass and stuff with English brewers and the use of chemicals. And isinglass is a weird one. We've talked about that in a previous show, but it's basically something that is harvested from the bladders of a certain type of fish. And they would use that, they would add that to their beer to get it to drop clear and basically kind of encourage the clumping together of particulates that drop out because they get heavier. Were English people early adopters of mechanical filters as well?
Yeah, certainly some of them were the history of how certain filters were adopted in the brewing industry. It's not necessarily readily available.
You mean there's not a book on the history of filtration in brewing?
Not a textbook that I have. I did get some excerpts from a friend who is going through like a wine and juice class that had some interesting background on the filtration in those industries. But in terms of beer, I think we might have to, look to Ron Pattinson's website.
I know. And that's Shut Up About Barclay Perkins. And, that's hugely English beer based, but filtration in general, the idea was to clarify and to get all of that stuff out of there. And you mentioned that one of the main purposes was for shelf stability. Talk to us a little bit about why filtered beer would have a longer shelf life than unfiltered beer.
So the filtration process mainly removes two big things that are left over in quote unquote unmature or young beer. And that would be yeast and then various proteins, which would be like a colloidal haze. So something like a chill haze, which would be various proteins that are left over in the beer that just take time to get out. Those proteins can undergo redox reactions, which rapidly stale beer, especially when warm. Today with refrigeration, that might not be as much of an issue, but back in the day when they were shipping things warm, removing those proteins from the finished beer would certainly increase that shelf stability, and still does today. It just probably has less of an impact.
Because of refrigeration and our ability to keep things cool and whatnot?
Yeah, exactly. There are various types of filters. When we get down to, say, the 1 micron, that's considered sterile filtration because certain bacteria can be removed. And typically brewers don't go much below that because when you do get below that, It can remove, color compounds, and it's thought to maybe affect the flavor. Though that would be something that would be interesting to do an experiment on, I think.
Definitely. So you say 1 micron, and for the like me, I've never used a mechanical filter. So for the filtration ignorant out there, most filters have different sizes through which the beer is essentially forced, and those different sizes will pull out or strip different, I guess, compounds that are in the beer. And, I don't know what the common sizes are. I know that there are different types of filters. Do they all use the same like micron?
Yeah, so they typically go through stages. Those can start as big as 50 micron and then go eventually down to 1 micron. There are 2 different ways of measuring what a filter is. One can be the average size of the pore. So just think of holes in a sheet, and the average size of what the size of that hole is going to be what you rate that filter pad as. So if you're talking 50 micron, that would mean the average size of the hole is 50 micron. There's another way to measure it too, which is the largest size of the hole, and that would be like, say, 50 micron would be the largest size of the hole, but there could be smaller ones in there as well.
Okay, so when I hear 50 micron, I'm thinking like
50
like
micron is
window.
like human hair size.
So what I was going to say is like a screen on a window, something like that almost.
Yeah, probably.
You're not going to filter that much out, but it's going to keep some stuff out.
Yep. Yeah. And then as you go down farther, the types of references are like human blood cells, and eventually down to bacteria size, which is that 1 micron, and why it's considered sterile filtration.
So by sterile filtration, that means if you're pushing something through 1 micron, whatever comes out the other side essentially is safe for consumption type of thing?
Yeah,
or?
It can be used in place of pasteurization. The textbook literature on this says it's not necessarily easy to get something filtered, quote unquote, pasteurized, and that it's quite expensive. Just because of the fact that it's filtering out so much that you're going to have to change or wash those pads, at a more regular basis than you would at, say, a 50 micron.
Yeah, that's interesting to me. And brewers, is there a specific size that brewers tend to stick with? I'd like to talk about the different types of filters used by professional and home brewers, actually. And again, mechanical filters, so the machines that they're using to filter out their beer. But is there a size that is kind of preferred by beer makers? So
again, the information is kind of hard to come by in terms of what they're using. I didn't see anything talking about brewers going below 1 micron. I'm sure there have been some or are some. The filters that I use in my filter are 5 micron. And when you look at like the More Beer website, you can see they sell various sizes, but they don't really sell anything below that 1 micron.
Okay, so the typical is going to be about 5 micron or so.
Yeah, I would think 10 to 5. And that's going to get out most of the yeast and protein that are really causing that haze left over in the young beer.
I know there are multiple types of filters, but what are these pads made of? Is it like a coarse fabric or a...
So I'm not necessarily sure what these pads are made of. Typically, filtration does involve some sort of a powder substance which can clump together with the various compounds left in there and just make them bigger so they don't go through the pores as readily. But it does seem to be some sort of like fabric.
It's weird that in all of my years of brewing, I've never used a mechanical filter, but just in talking about it, I'm really curious to try it out. I know that you've got experience doing it, and it does seem to work in terms of clarity. We'll get to that a little bit later. What are the different types of filters used? I know that one of the ones that you're going to find on the professional scale that I think is probably unreasonable for a home brewer to use is a centrifuge.
Yeah, so there are pretty much 3 different types of filters used by professionals. The first one being diatomaceous earth. That was very popular, a few years back. So basically, that's running the beer through a certain substance, which is being that earth, allowing it to clear and filter through that. That's pretty much gone away or going away due to the fact that there are some carcinogens, and the environmental load of that is pretty high. So the 2 most common these days are membrane-based, which is kind of what I was talking about with those various different pads or sieves that are micron rated. So
Right.
essentially, think of like an RO system where you're going through a series of filters of different membranes. So the beer is pushed through that at various pressures. I believe when you get down to 1 micron, the force needed to push it through that is between 10 and 100 bar. So essentially, it goes through these various membranes, filters out in a stage basis. And using those various membranes is good because it lightens the load on the smaller micron type filters, so it extends the life of those. Some of the drawbacks of this are it is expensive to keep replacing those filters. Typically, they're only able to be used for one filtration session, and then they need to either be cleaned or replaced.
That's because they just get so clogged up with gunk that's in the beer already.
Yeah. So the load of the stuff going through them, does kind of render them useless after one use until you do clean or replace them. And another note too is that the beer does need to be cold in order to do this. So cold beer, as many of us will know, becomes hazier than when we first probably keg or bottle that beer, unless you are cold crashing. But the chill does promote those proteins to come together and clump together, allowing them to be taken out of solution a lot more easily.
So in essence, the more you do to make the beer that is the finished beer, we'll say, the more you do to make it hazy before filtration, the more of that stuff you're going to get pulled out of it, basically, right?
Yeah, definitely the more effective it will be. So if you think about it, say we serve our beer between 32 and 38 degrees, certain proteins come together at those specific temperatures and are more apparent. If we're going to filter it, we're going to filter it at those temperatures we're serving at, just because of the fact that it's easier. They get bigger. They're easier to take out.
So for the homebrewer then, that we have different types of filters that a homebrewer can go out and purchase and use to clear their beer. I think most of them involve racking the beer from one keg to another, because you do need some pressure behind the beer, right? To push it through the filter?
Yeah, you do. So the membrane based is very similar to what homebrewers are using. So it's either typically a water canister. Think of like your RV type water filters that we use.
Right.
And it's usually a 2-stage. The first stage having that higher micron type filter in it. The second stage being a little bit more fine. So you'll keg it up into a keg after fermentation. Let it get cold. So like leave it in there a day or two to get down to that serving temperature you want to make that haze apparent. And then you'll push it through with CO2 through your 2 or 3 stage filter process into your serving keg. And it should come out of there pretty clear.
So, okay, and I've seen these ones. They look exactly like most of the beer filters I see have a clear casing around it, as opposed to like I have a RV filter that I use just to filter my brewing water with. And the filter that's in there, correct me if I'm wrong, you're not using that it's not like you can just go buy an RV filter and use that to filter your beer.
I don't have a ton of experience with it, but I believe they are carbon based. The carbon-based filters, so they clump to those specific hazes in there and push it through some sort of membrane. I don't think they're as effective as plate filters, but I think you can use those same type filters that you would use for RV. It just might not be rated as fine as some of the other ones you could buy.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, I've seen people like online using these bluish clear filters for their beer. To me, again, this is as somebody someone who's never actually filtered their beer using a machine like this. To me, that seems like it. First off, when I filter water, when I go out to brew and I filter some water up, there's quite a bit of water left over in that reservoir where the filter is at. I would imagine that you're losing a decent amount of beer in the filtration process, at least when using this canister type kind of RV filter.
Yeah, I would think you are. I think most filters are pretty much subject to some sort of loss. If that's going to be a liquid going through that. It's probably going to depend on the capacity of the certain filter you're using, but there will definitely be loss.
Yeah. Okay. You mentioned plate filter, and my understanding is the reason they call it a plate filter is just because of the shape.
Yeah. So a plate filter is somewhat similar to the canister filter in that we're running it through, a specific type of membrane. A plate filter does have more surface area. So the one that I have, and this is a pretty common one, I think used in the homebrew wine and beer, type setting. It's going to have inputs coming from one side that are going to flow across 2 different filters And basically those filters are the surface area of maybe, I don't know, a 12-inch circle. So it's gonna be pushed through these filters and then come together on one side and be pushed out the middle. It is pretty effective. It's not 2-stage or anything like that. It is 1 stage, but you could hook it up to multiple and make a multiple stage filter out of that.
Just daisy chain a couple together type of thing.
Yeah, you could, but
but the thing is, you might not need to, because I've seen the product that is, a beer that is immediately pushed through one of these plate filters, and it's striking in my experience the difference that can happen because of these plate filters. I mean, anybody out there who's used one knows what we're talking about. So you've got these canister kind of RV type filters. You've got plate filters. Are there any other type of mechanical filter that a home brewer or a small craft brewer might be able to use as well? I know that there's like carbon block, but that's usually just for water, right?
Yeah. So the other big one that's used, and it's mostly used by professional brewers, though it is gaining popularity in the craft brew scene, is a centrifuge. So it's a fairly new technology in a commercial sense. It uses the act of spinning, so forcing the liquid to spin into a column as a way to separate out the solids, causing them to drop out of the sides and be collected. It was, again, invented for dairy production. Its uses in dairy are like clarification, creaming, whey separation, and bactofuge, which is removing bacteria. Seems like filtration, has been used as a way to make things safer over the years.
Definitely. I was up in Yakima. I think this one was 2 years ago for Hop Harvest, and we went out to Bale Breaker, and they've got a centrifuge. And if you've never seen a centrifuge in the brewery, at least at work, they're kind of terrifying. These things are nuts.
They're so loud. Yeah,
they're so loud. It sounds like guns going off.
Yeah.
Boom. But it definitely works to make beer clear. And I'll tell you what, I've seen IPAs go through centrifuges, and in my anecdotal experience, they still taste like IPA.
Yeah. So one of the coolest things about centrifuging compared to, say, like a plate filter or a membrane filter, is the fact that anything that was in that trube, so like we can think that like hop oils might get caught in that trube, that's going to go back into your beer when you're spinning it, just because the oils have a smaller density than what you're actually filtering out using the centrifuge. So there is some anecdotal evidence out there that using a centrifuge can cause IPAs to taste better.
So within mechanical filters, there's even some conflict as to, I guess not conflict, but there's some debate as to which one might strip a beer of more flavor than others.
Right, because the thought is those hop oils are caught up in that trube or those large particles that you're filtering out, and that the centrifuge, with everything being equal until they start to be pushed to the side, those
Right.
oils actually stay in suspension. But another pro of the centrifuge is zero oxygen exposure. So I would think, especially with IPAs, a centrifuge would be the way to go compared to any sort of other mechanical filtration.
And we as homebrewers don't really have anything available to us that would kind of mimic a centrifuge.
I mean, you could probably make one or buy one, repurpose it, but I think the cost would far outweigh the benefit on that.
Yeah, and again, watching Bale Breaker use theirs, there's a decent amount of loss in these things. And I think that's just the case with most mechanical filtration. Well, we've talked a bit about the different types of filters, how they work and whatnot. I've been drinking craft beer since 2002. And when I got into it, like I mentioned this earlier, craft brewers would market the fact that their beer was alive or that their beer was unfiltered. And the idea was that, you're getting all the full flavor that Bud Miller Coors doesn't sell to you. The reason that their pale fizzy lager is so flavorless is partially because they filter their beer. And I mean, I bought into it. I don't know how long. You're a bit younger than me, Jake. Is that something that you recall being kind of a big deal?
So I think, as you know, I kind of started my craft beer drinking experience in Wisconsin, and New Glarus is a heavy marketer of that. This beer is, all natural, unfiltered, blah, blah, blah. So I definitely bought into it for a bit. I would say it probably wasn't until I started actually homebrewing myself that I was like, hey, I want this beer to be clearer.
And which is funny because I know a lot of homebrewers who they live and die by the fact that their beer's unfiltered. And I'm a little bit cynical, but not in some malicious way. There's a part of me that thinks that maybe the love of the unfiltered thing is just because it's the easiest excuse for not making a pretty beer.
Yeah, that definitely could be. I mean,
that's going to get me into trouble.
Probably.
To go from, my beer's not clear to my beer tastes better, not clear, it seems like a weird jump for me. And I think it's curious that homebrewers and craft beer drinkers would kind of hang on to this thing and then, convince other people and market to other people that is actually better, that the lack of clarity is better without real strong data to back that up. And it makes sense. You are stripping stuff out of the beer. It makes sense to me that you could kind of presume that some of that stuff has flavor to it. And I'm sure that if you were to taste it, it wouldn't be flavorless.
Yeah, I mean, I think when marketing's involved, anything is an easy jump to make. So you're going to take your product that you have and see how it's different from the competitor and, find a reason why that's better.
Yeah, well, yeah. And when your competitor is, viewed as being this evil corporation or mass of corporations, I guess it makes sense that you would use something like, the way your beer looks or how it's treated to distinguish it from them. All good. Jake, you did do an experiment on this filtration thing. What was your inspiration for wanting to do this in the first place?
Well, I think first of all, I love clear beer. Prior to doing some changes to my setup, I could never quite achieve that clarity that I wanted without cold crashing, which I've been kind of averse to for the past few years or so, just due to like that potential oxidation.
Right.
So I wanted my clear beer. I was kind of becoming adverse to adding gelatin just for those like oxidation concerns.
Right.
So I wanted to try filtration and see if it was able to clear these beers up really well and if there was any sort of detriment to it.
Yeah, well, as someone who initially bought into the idea that filtration removed beer flavor, I mean, I'll admit I was there. This experiment was one that I was really, really excited about. Details and results when we return from this short break. So I've been hanging out with brewers and craft beer nerds for a long time now, and while we do occasionally have our differences, one thing it seems we all share is a love of learning and trying new things, as well as saving a couple of bucks. Well, right now, Craft Beer and Brewing is helping fans of Brewlosophy learn more while saving some coin by offering 20% off the price of a subscription to their awesome magazine. Chock full of brewing insights, tips, and recipes from industry experts, Craft Beer and Brewing is seriously great. I read every issue page to page myself. To get 20% off your subscription, all you have to do is sign up at beerandbrewing.com/brewlosophy. Have you ever thought about adding a port to your kettle but held off because you didn't feel like drilling into your gear or sending it off to have someone else do it? From the makers of the super fast counterflow chiller, the Accelerator, comes the Hangover, the easiest way to add extra ports to your kettle as well as countless other options. Mount a faucet to your keg for easy portable pouring. Set up the perfect whirlpool arm. Hold a heating element in place. All of this and so much more without permanently modifying your gear. Manufactured right here in the United States, the Hangover offers brewers too many convenient solutions to list here. So head over to Accelerator.com today to see what the Hangover can do for you. When dumping wort-soaked grain and leftover low-gravity wort while cleaning up after a brew day, do you ever wonder what your true efficiency would be if that wort made its way to the kettle instead? Using the brew bag, a fabric filter for all mash tuns and brewing methods, allows you to capture every last drop of wort. Not only does this increase kettle efficiency, it lowers your grain bill, which saves you money. Throwing wort in the trash is like dumping a 12-pack down the drain and just doesn't make sense. Use the brew bag and leave no wort behind. I've been using these filters for a long time and recommend them to everyone. I never have to worry about a stuck sparge and cleanup is fast and easy. Go grab yourself a brew bag fabric filter at brewinabag.com and be sure to use code TBP17 at checkout to get a discount on your order.
Compact and simple to use with a small footprint for brewing indoors, the Grainfather makes it easy for you to brew professional quality beers at home. The Grainfather is an all-in-one brewing system that lets you brew all grain beer in a single compact stainless steel unit. It uses an electric heating element and pump to maintain a constant temperature and to circulate the wort during the mashing and cooling stages. It also comes with a counterflow chiller to reduce chilling times and produce high quality wort. And now, with the addition of their conical fermenter, the Grainfather takes things one step further by offering homebrewers state-of-the-art temperature-controlled fermentation just like commercial breweries use. And with the Grainfather Recipe Creator and Connect app, you can easily design a recipe, sync your brewing system with your phone, and then just sit back and relax as the app takes over and assures that you maintain your scheduled mash temps and boil schedule. Head to grainfather.com to purchase your all-in-one brewing system today and to sign up for their free recipe creator tool. Once more, head on over to grainfather.com, that's grainfather.com, and get started today.
Despite my shifting beliefs regarding the use of filters for beer based on personal experience, I was chomping at the bit for this experiment, not only to see the impact a mechanical filter actually has on clarity, but whether or not tasters would be able to tell a filtered beer apart from an unfiltered version.
Yeah, so as a lover of bright beer, as I know you are, I had tried various things throughout my homebrew career to make beer as clear as possible. The first, of course, being that chemical filtration that we talked about earlier. For me, that mainly meant the use of gelatin. But, as homebrewers have started to shift towards these styles that are super hoppy and required to be consumed very fresh, my concerns about oxidation started to grow. And nothing is probably a bigger source of oxidation than opening up that lid of the fermentation vessel and adding some gelatin, or opening up the keg and adding some gelatin to that.
Right. And we did get some awesome feedback a couple weeks ago from a dude who kind of has this cool invention for adding at least liquid adjuncts to the keg. But yeah, you're right. One of the biggest concerns that I have, and I'm a user of gelatin. I've kind of been shying away from it because all the hate that I get for using gelatin in our experiment beers. So I've not been doing it as often. The ease of adding gelatin is kind of balanced out by the fact that you are potentially adding oxygen to the beer as well. So mechanical filtration kind of eliminates that. Is there a risk? I would imagine anytime you're doing transfers, you're kind of doing a keg to keg transfer when you're using a mechanical filter. There is a risk of oxidation, doing that as well, right?
Oh yeah, there definitely is. To combat that, I pretty much flush the crap out of my filter and purge that second keg that I was filtering into. Was it still probably oxidized some or exposed to some oxygen? Yeah, I'm sure that's the case. But I thought it would be probably a way to alleviate that a little bit.
Well, and you picked up this mechanical filter. You got a plate filter from More Beer, right?
Yes. So it's a plate filter that has two separate pads. So again, like I talked about, it comes in from both sides, goes to the middle, being pushed by pressure, and then out one side together.
And goes right, and then you rack it into another keg that you purge with CO2.
Yes. So the whole process is a closed process.
What we wanted to see the most was the difference between doing nothing at all, no filtration, so no gelatin, nothing like that, compared to a beer that was mechanically filtered. Now, before we get to the experiment, just a little disclaimer. I've currently got a neighbor who is vacuuming his fake lawn, and it sounds like, Jake, you've got some people doing construction in the background. If that's distracting, we do apologize. Tell us about this experiment that you did.
So... as someone who's very interested in this filtration, and one of my favorite styles really being English bitter type beers, a style known for its clarity, I thought it would be interesting to design this experiment around a style of beer that was known to be very clear. So I brewed up what had kind of become my standard English bitter. I know for a while I think for like a year, I pretty much only brewed English bitter.
You were making a lot of English bitter for a bit there, yeah.
I know, they're so good. So I settled on this recipe, and I believe I've brewed this one about 5 times now. It's basically anywhere from about 92% to 95% pale malt. So that could be like a Maris Otter, a Golden Promise, anything that's got a little bit higher Lovibond than just a standard pale ale, or a standard pale malt, yeah. So this is a pale ale malt. And then for the remainder of that, I try to do a blend of crystals to get to around 60 to 80 SRM. And that's anywhere between 5 and 8% of the grist, just depending on how caramely I want it. Mm-hmm. For the hops, I've settled on Pico hops as my English bitter hop. I think it provides, a really nice English character to the beer. And with English bitters, traditionally it's Fuggle or East Kent Golding, but I think you can use pretty much any hop in there, and it really
You're not.
interacts
It's not like
nicely.
you're overly hopping this beer, right?
Oh
I think
no, it's not highly hopped whatsoever.
I think you used. I'm looking at the recipe now. You used 20 grams. I call it Pecco. I don't know if it's Pico or Pecco, but you used 20 grams at 30 minutes and 20 grams at 5 minutes. I mean, that's 20 grams is like a 2/3 of an ounce type of thing.
Yeah, it's definitely not a lot, but I think it's a great hop. So I made up a starter of the Fuller's Ale strain from Imperial Yeast. I believe that's their pub.
Yeah, it's AO9 Pub. It's a fantastic yeast that, interestingly, is known for being highly flocculent. So a part of me, when you chose to do a bitter for this and using the AO9, I was kind of thinking that the other beer might just clear out on its own, anyways. Given the yeast strain that you're using.
Yeah, eventually it would, but we kind of wanted to see what it looked like right away.
Yeah, right.
So I brewed up these beers. Since this was a variable that would be introduced, post fermentation, I mashed the entire grist, so 10 gallons, lautered that off, boiled it as 10 gallons, split it off into 2 fermenters, and pitched equal amounts of yeast in both fermenters. Pretty simple brew day. The split post-boil ones are nice and easy. I know
Yes,
Marshall
they are.
hates when we brew them, but they are nice.
I don't hate them. We got to get the hard stuff. That's what we do, man.
So, pretty simple brew day. When everything was done, pitched the yeast. 9 days later, they were both sitting at, a specific gravity that was about 1.0, so 1010. Both had finished to the same gravity. And so it was at that point that I kegged these beers up into CO2 purged kegs. So they were both going to go into a keg to start with. Both got put in my keezer, and I did not carbonate them right away because I knew I was going to be filtering one of them. So I put them in my keezer at about 1 psi of gas. And
Just to have positive pressure on the keg, right? To keep the lid seated and
to keep oxygen out. Yep.
to keep oxygen out. Now, the whole purpose, you talked about this earlier, the whole purpose with you throwing the kegs in the keezer for a couple of days was to encourage the formation of chill haze.
Exactly. So I left them in there for about 5 days just because, like life things happen and you can't necessarily get to beer every second of the day.
Right.
But I would have probably felt comfortable filtering this after about a day of sitting in the keezer. So yeah, I put them in the keezer on 1 psi to let them get cold, just to encourage the formation of that chill haze in both beers. So after it had sat in there for 5 days, I pulled the beer out that was meant to be kegged, or meant to be filtered, sorry. Pulled that out, hooked it up to CO2. I purged the plate filter after putting the 5 micron pads in there, purged that with CO2, and purged the secondary serving vessel for this specific beer with CO2, basically to try to eliminate oxygen as much as possible.
Right. And the idea here is we want to make sure that we're testing the variable of filtration and not necessarily all of the kind of downstream things that can happen as well. I'm thinking if you had racked that beer, for example, into a non-purged keg, there's a vector of influence there would be oxidation, and that could have been what explains any differences between these beers. So you did everything you could to make sure that these beers were identical, with the exception of one being pushed through this plate filter.
Yeah, and like we said, I mean, there's probably some sort of exposure to oxygen, but we just wanted to try to eliminate that as much as possible.
Right. And we talk about this a lot, that there are aspects to some variables like filtration where you're not going to be able to avoid the introduction of secondary variables or extraneous variables. And we kind of look at that as being a function of the variable that we're testing. If you're going to filter, you have to do these other things, right? You have to push it from one keg to another. And you have to, I guess, assume some risk when you do that. So it makes sense to me that even if there was a difference, it would still be packaged in this explanation of filtration, right?
Exactly. So I had filtered a few times prior to this, since getting my filter on non-experiment batches, just to kind of get a feel for the filter and figure out how it works. And with these plate filters, they are very effective. You do really have to make sure that the plate filter is very tight. Otherwise, you're going to have some leakage. And I think even with it being as tight as possible, you still do get some leakage, but it's certainly not as bad as the first couple times I used it. So if you do get one of these and you are trying it those first few times, expect some leakage and just kind of figure out what works for you in terms of how to make this filter work. But it can be sealed very well as to pretty much eliminate that leakage.
At what pressure are you pushing beer through this thing? I mean, did you have to? In my mind, I'm thinking it's at like 3 to 5 psi, something like that.
I forget the max. It is rated for a max PSI. I think I pushed through at like 3.
Okay, so it will. So you don't need to have, because I was thinking, you said 10 bar on some of these, professional size filters. I'm thinking, God, that's a lot of pressure.
Yeah, and up to 100 too, and that's
or
a lot
100
of
bar.
pressure
God,
as well.
yeah, that's nuts. So you're pushing it at a fairly kind of like reasonable, PSI. You can blow, 3 PSI. So how much loss did you have? That was one of the things that I was really curious about. Did it make a big mess in your garage? Did you lose a bunch of beer?
No, the loss was pretty much whatever is contained in the pads, and just a little bit left in the filter housing as well. So after it had pushed that entire keg out, so I was using normal dip tubes at this point, so those do go to the bottom of the keg.
Right.
So the keg that it was pulling from, it pushed everything out of that, and then I just let it blow straight CO2 for probably about 30 seconds after it was done pushing all the liquid out. So there was some loss. Like I said, most of the loss was what was contained in the filter pads.
That's pretty good. Would you say that it made like a pint, 2 pints of beer, something like that, or?
Yeah, about that much. Basically, what you would get if you were to keg up a beer and let all of this drop out and settle in the bottom, I think it was pretty equivalent to that.
Okay, so that's kind of a cool way to think about it too. And rather than getting to the end of a keg and having to toss maybe a little bit, a pint or two that's kind of gunky at the bottom of your keg, you're able to drink the whole entire keg, I imagine.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, well, that's kind of cool. So you did something that I thought was fun. Immediately after filtering these things, you took samples right off the bat. So both beers are cold. You stole a little sample of the unfiltered batch. You stole a sample of the freshly filtered batch. And they looked exactly the same. Just kidding.
So I pulled these. This was basically 5 days after they had been kegged from the fermentation vessel. So anybody who has kegged up a beer that they've fermented before kind of probably has a good baseline of what a beer looks like anywhere up to a week in the keg before it really starts getting clear. So you can see these pictures on the website for this article. The beer on the left is the unfiltered beer, and you can see it. It looks like a homebrew beer. I mean, it's not necessarily hazy or murky like we would think of a New England IPA, but it looks like a freshly kegged beer with probably some yeast and some chill haze in it.
Yeah.
And then contrasting that is the beer that I had just run through the filter, and it looks like glass basically.
That is one of the most satisfying photos that I think we've ever put on brewlosophy.com. There's something about like, I bought this product. Is it really going to work as advertised? And this thing worked as advertised. I mean, that beer is bright right out of the filter.
Yeah, it looks incredible. And, with burst carbonation, like I said, I would be comfortable probably filtering this beer one day after being kegged to get cold. With burst carbonation, you could be drinking commercially clear beer within probably 2 days of kegging your beer.
I think it's awesome. And I think, if you're into clear beer and not waiting for your beer to clear up, or using chemicals, if you don't want to use gelatin or biofine, whatever, these things are like, what, $60, I think you can get one of these plate filters for, and they do the trick. I mean, that much is clear. God. So you put these beers back in, though, you carbonated them up. How long did you wait before you started collecting data on these ones?
So I believe I started collecting data on this after about 2 weeks in the keg. You can see, I have a various, timeline of pictures here in terms of the clarity of these two different beers. So 5 days post filtering, I took a picture, and the unfiltered beer is starting to clear up a little bit. So you can think, what is that, about 10 days post kegging, and then all the way to 2 weeks post filtering. You can see the beers are pretty close. But the unfiltered beer definitely has a little bit more of a haze. So at about that time is when I put these to data.
Yeah, and I mean, just my comments on the difference in these beers, it's not subtle. There's a difference. The unfiltered one looks completely. I would drink it. It doesn't look ugly. It looks quote unquote clear. The filtered one is bright. I mean, it looks like you just poured it from, a commercially filtered bottle of beer. So just to get that out there, it is very clear. And the unfiltered one, while it did clear up, just never quite reached that same brightness as the filtered one. Again, satisfying as hell for me, because I just think these relatively inexpensive machines actually do a really good job, and I think that's cool. So you'd serve this to 27 people, a pretty good sample size for what it is we do. And out of those 27, 14 people would have to identify the unique sample in the triangle test for us to say that these beers were significantly different, that they were reliably distinguishable. Out of those 27 people, a whopping 4 people chose the odd beer out. That's astonishing because 15%, you expect 33% of people are randomly guessing. Again, that's how randomness works. Four people is no different than if it had it been, 7 or 8 or 9 people, whatever. But this was very clearly, these beers did not taste or smell different to most people.
Yeah. People really, couldn't tell the difference. It's funny because when we do these sort of data collection sessions, anytime it's like with a homebrew club, after we're done collecting the data, I'll pour 2 samples of the resulting beers and pass them around for people to, smell, taste, look at. And when I passed this one around, I think the room was pretty astonished at the difference in how these beers looked.
And what's funny, I do that same thing, right? After they do the triangle test, usually I'm doing them in my garage here. Just had some folks over yesterday. And afterwards, I'll usually, especially when there's a clarity difference or an appearance difference of any sort, I'll serve them samples side by side in the glasses. And almost every time you'll get a few people who are going, oh, now, yeah, obviously these taste different. So it's like the bias continues to play out even after they weren't able to accurately identify the odd beer out, in a triangle test. I always think that's interesting. A couple years ago, someone left a comment on one of our experiments. I believe it was the gelatin experiment, saying that because sight is one of the 5 senses, we shouldn't be obscuring appearance during the triangle test. For those who may not know, we serve beers to participants in these opaque, plastic colored cups. The idea being that we want them to choose the different one or the one they think is different based on, flavor, aroma, and mouthfeel. To me, the results from this experiment and other ones that kind of show that appearance differences may not necessarily lead to flavor differences, it proves why it's so important to keep appearance hidden. I don't think there's anybody who, if they had these 3 beers lined up in glasses, wouldn't have been able to identify the unique sample. And yet when you cover up appearance, they can't identify it at all.
Right. And even in my own tastings of this beer, I mean, we're all biased, and we all go into these experiments having tasted the beer throughout the entire process, and even seeing the beer prior to doing this triangle test. But I simply could not get these beers correct in terms of my triangle test. To me, they tasted, smelled, everything was the same except for that, appearance, where the one to me looked much, much better.
Yeah. And there's going to be people in both camps, right? The clear beer camp and the who cares camp that can use this data to kind of back up their beliefs. I'm a clear beer guy, so I look at it and I say, I can filter my beer, I can do all of this stuff, and it's not going to lose flavor. But then I can see the argument from the other side of people saying, well, why would you do that when it doesn't matter, right? This hazy stuff still tastes as good as that filtered stuff. So take it, take the data however you want. This is just one data point. We have to point that out. But I think it's absolutely fascinating that this idea, this, along with, we've done other, chemical filtration experiments out there that are showing the same results. It doesn't seem like clear beer loses any flavor.
Right. And it doesn't really seem like it gains any either, which, it's kind of shocking because I feel like with a young beer, sometimes you can definitely taste that yeast in suspension, especially with like lagers where they retain, some of that sulfur character, or maybe like an acetaldehyde character. It just doesn't seem like that comes through in the flavor when you're comparing it blindly to a different beer that is clearer.
Yeah, well, I think it's fascinating. We're going to get to some reader comments here. People commented on Facebook and on the website and on other social media when we published these very, we kind of presumed they were going to be kind of contested, results. But one of the most common comments we got was, yeah, it makes sense that it wouldn't change the taste of an English bitter. You should have done a New England IPA, Jake.
I mean, if I liked to brew New England IPAs, I would definitely do that. I think if we can get Brian a filter, I think he would be down to do that one.
My guess would be, I mean, you were saying that these filters really do gunk up, and you used a flocculent yeast. You brewed a fairly non-hazy style of beer in the first place, and yet, your filter was still pretty gunked up, right?
Yeah. I had pictures of it. I don't think any of those made it into the article. But it did have kind of, think of the bottom of a keg or the bottom of a fermentation vessel, and just put that kind of yeast gunk onto this plate. And it probably had about, I don't know, a couple centimeters of gunk on it at the end of this all.
So my guess would be that whatever it is that makes New England IPA hazy, you're going to be stripping a lot more stuff out of a New England IPA. Basically what I'm saying is I think you'd probably have to swap out filters midway through the filtering process.
You might have to. If it stops flowing, you would definitely know that you have to, but I would think for 5 gallons, you could probably be fine with one of these 5 micron, or maybe even just go up to 10 micron. So you're not filtering out as much, but you are still getting a lot of that gunk out of there.
Okay. Yeah. Now I really want to see if we can make, here's a guy named Jason, actually. He left a comment on the article. He says, I would love to have this same experiment run with a hazy IPA with 16 ounces or so of dry hopping per 5-gallon batch. The arguments for not filtering seem to mainly have to do with hop aroma and flavor, which this experiment could not really address due to the beer style brulosophy bingo. And I'd love to see if the mechanical filtration would actually be able to clear a hazy IPA, since the previous experiment with using fining agents wasn't able to. He's referring to the collaboration experiment we did with Ed Coffee, where Ed used gelatin in a New England IPA, and it did not seem, it didn't clarify the beer the way it does other styles. I agree. And a lot of people echoed this, this comment. They want to see it done on a New England IPA. If we can make a hazy beer that's clear, I think it'd be cool too.
Yeah, and I think it would definitely work. The thing about filters is they are very effective. You're pushing something through a membrane that is only a certain size, so I don't see why it would not fail to trap these certain particles. And I think that would be cool to see. I don't like brewing New England IPAs.
Oh, now you're going to get in trouble, Jake.
That's fine.
Yeah, I know. I'm with you. I'm with you. We'll get one for Brian. I actually want to see this done really bad now. Do you think that it would strip a hazy? Do you think there are things in New England IPA? We've both made our fair share and drank our fair share of this style. Do you think it would strip like some of the mouthfeel or maybe some of the hop aroma? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't know. The mouthfeel is said to be a lot related to water chemistry. These filters are not small enough to do like an RO type filtration. So I don't think it's going to be filtering out any of that chloride mouthfeel or anything. In terms of hop aroma, I don't necessarily know the size of the particles that are creating that hop aroma or hop flavor. My guess would be that it's not going to filter out those specific hop oils unless they're caught up in the trub. But maybe.
Maybe, yeah. Or if it does, would it be to a perceptible degree? That's one of the things I think about is, sure, maybe it's going to pull some stuff out, but is it enough for you to be able to taste it? Who knows? We're going to do this one, though. I'm very interested to watch Brian do this.
Yeah. and then I think if it does come out as, say, like failure to establish significance, maybe we go down to like a 1 micron, where we're getting towards closer to that sterile type that sterile type filtration where it's said to start affecting flavor.
Yeah. Oh man, super interesting. Another comment comes from Jordan B. I don't know his last name, but it said B. And he put this on the article. He says, I assume mechanical filters would strip out yeast and thus not work when bottle conditioning beer.
I guess I don't necessarily know. It does strip out yeast. It's very effective at that. I don't know if there's any left in order to bottle condition a beer. I don't know. If you're filtering a beer through one of these filters, you obviously have a kegging setup. So I don't necessarily know why you would be bottle conditioning, but regardless, if you wanted to, give it a try, but maybe just add a bottling strain to that second keg that you're filtering to.
Yeah, that would be my thing. I've definitely had the issue back when I was bottle conditioning where I let a beer sit in secondary for a bit too long and it just took forever to carbonate, and yeast falls out of suspension. When it's done working, it goes to bed basically. So I would, I'm with you. If you're using a filter, you've got kegs. You kind of got to use a keg to filter these beers. I don't know. Can you use a siphon from like a carboy to a bottling bucket? Would it provide enough pressure to push it through a plate filter?
I don't think so. I've never tried it.
Yeah.
If it did, I would think it would be very, very slow.
Right. Yeah. So I guess if you're going to do this and you want to bottle condition your beer, I'd do what you said, Jake, and just add a little bit of maybe champagne yeast or something at bottling. Our friend Will Allwart asked, how expensive are the filters and how often do they need to be replaced?
So 2 questions there. The filter housing itself can run you anywhere between, I think, like $50 and $120, depending on what type you get. The filter media, so the pads in my case, or if you're using a canister, those canister inserts, those do need to be replaced every time. One, just for sanitation purposes. You don't want to be leaving a filter sit around for a while with all this stuff in there that could be contaminated. So you're going to want to replace those every time. And those run anywhere between $1 and $5 each. So it's not
bad.
Yeah, it's not cheap, but it's not going to break the bank.
Can you buy those filters like in bulk, just like huge box of those?
Yeah, I think I have like 20 of them in my basement.
Oh, okay, that's cool. And you can't. It's not like you can take them out, wash them off, dry them out. I mean, that's not sanitary, right?
I think you could do that, but yeah, it's definitely not sanitary. I mean, maybe you could run some Star Sand through it if you're really trying to penny pinch. But if you're filtering your beer, I don't think that's necessarily a concern for you.
So would you say then, doing it the way you do it, that your added cost per batch is maybe what, $3 to $5, something like that?
Well, when you amortize the housing, maybe to like $6.
Okay, geez, that's not cheap. I mean, if you're spending $30 on a batch of beer, to add another $5-6 to it, it's a decent chunk. Well, Tim Vandergrift on the article, he said the idea that filtering strips is ludicrous. Flavor and aroma molecules are far too small to be trapped by a 2 micron or even a 0.2 micron filter element. And body comes from alcohol and unfermented carbohydrates, not suspended gunk. Once you get the suspended gunk out of the way, the beer is prettier and still delicious.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, the literature that I cited as it relates to stripping flavor or aroma compounds, cited less than 1. So I would think at 0.2, you run the risk of stripping something that could be a flavor or aroma compound. And maybe even some color too.
I mean, it just seems so weird to me, that craft brewers relied so much on this unfiltered argument. And maybe I'm missing the point. Maybe I just assumed that it was an argument, for flavor. But maybe it had there was something deeper to the reason they tried to sell their beers being unfiltered and whatnot. But it just seems so weird to me that it doesn't seem to make that much of a difference.
Yeah, I would agree with you.
That's so weird. All right, Greg Linton, he left a comment on Facebook. He said, I filtered half of a pale ale, and I thought it lost a little flavor. I had others do a side-by-side, and the filtered beer was described as seeming, he put in quotes, lighter. Still a good beer, just slightly different than the unfiltered. Maybe this is a your mileage may vary technique. My response to that, to Greg's comment here, is that when we do a triangle test, the whole point is to remove bias, right? And that's why we serve them, again, in these opaque cups. You can't see the beer. Maybe you guys did taste a difference. I don't mean to like detract from people's abilities to perceive beer in the way that they do. Okay. But you got this nice clear pale ale sitting in front of you. You got this hazier version of it. The fact that people, tasted one as being lighter doesn't surprise me. That's kind of the way bias works. I think, I'm certain I've been caught up in the same thing. I'm sure, Jake, you have as well.
Yeah. We were just talking about that before we started recording here, that I have a beer on tap right now where I know the variable between the two, and I haven't put it to data yet, so I've been drinking it side by side, and I was like, oh, this one is so much better. This one specific portion of the variable is so much better than the other one. I found myself pulling from that one more, and then I opened up my keezer to do some cleaning and realized that the one I thought was better what was the opposite of the one I expected to be better.
Right.
So that expectation bias, I think, can really influence your perception of a beer.
And I don't want to get too caught up on the bias talk in this episode, but we kind of do every episode. The thing is, it is just there. It's not a bad word. Bias isn't a bad word. That'd be a good t-shirt. Everybody's biased and we're all susceptible to it, and it's not a bad thing. But to think that you have the ability to taste the difference between a filtered and an unfiltered beer when you're sitting and looking right at them and you're seeing a difference, I don't know. I think there's that's a good argument for blindness, is that, when you don't see that one's clearer than the other one, it may not actually impact the way they taste to you. I don't know. Maybe they did taste a difference. But all right, final comment. This was left by I am Ryan. on Reddit. He put, this is a question for you, Jake. He put, would you still cold crash it even if you're going to use one of these filters then? Or does the filter negate the need for cold crashing?
Well, so you have to filter cold. Filtering warm is not effective. Similar to like the use of gelatin. We always recommend getting that beer cold prior to adding the fining agent. In terms of what I cold crash in the fermentation vessel, I don't do this anymore. I would certainly do it with like a unitank or something where you can apply positive pressure to it. Just for me, the concerns about oxidation are enough that I don't cold crash. So I would just, if cold crash is part of your standard process, yes, I would cold crash, keg it up, and then filter it. The filter is probably going to be slightly more effective for you just because of the fact that it's not going to have that biomass that it's taking out the same as if you left all that haze in there.
Right. Yeah, makes sense to me. Well, Jake, are you still filtering? Do you use your filter at all anymore these days? Or
I do sometimes with like quick batches that I'm brewing for, say like a party or for friends, just to turn it around much quicker. In terms of experiment beer, I think it just adds too many variables to the situation to want to filter that. There is that oxidation risk, which I think is very real on our scale, especially with these smaller type filters that aren't necessarily airtight. So I'm not doing it for most of the beers I brew, but for quick turnaround beers, in beers that I want to present to people very clear, I certainly do.
That's my thing. I have never mechanically filtered beer. I don't have a mechanical filtration system here. I can see why it seems like a really neat thing, but I just don't like doing more things. Like you said, even for experiment beers, it adds all of these vectors for potential extraneous variables to have an impact. I just don't like to do all these extra things on even, just brewing regular beers. So I'm not sure I'll be picking up a filter anytime soon, though I am really, really excited again to see if we can't make a hazy IPA not so hazy. So that's all the time we've got for this show. Jake, any parting words, man?
No.
Right on. Don't forget to head over to brewlosophy.com to read about the experiment discussed in this episode, as well as everything else we're up to. The Brewlosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors, as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to brewlosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit patreon.com/brewlosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brewlosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey, cause it suits my bro. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman no more.